The crack of a gavel echoed through the makeshift auction hall, silencing the crowd of whiskey-soaked men who had gathered in the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, 1875. Rosalie Montgomery trembled as rough hands pushed her onto the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded room, praising her cooking skills and docile nature, as if she were a prized mare rather than a 20-year-old woman who had lost everything. "What do I hear for this fine specimen?" The auctioneer called out, his tobacco-stained teeth visible beneath his mustache. "Young, healthy, and educated too, can read and write better than most men in this territory." Rosalie kept her gaze fixed on the floorboards beneath her feet, refusing to meet the hungry stares of the men below. Her father's debts had brought her here after his death just 2 weeks prior. The bank had taken everything, their modest home on the edge of town, their furniture, even her mother's silver hairbrush. Now they were taking her freedom. $200, called a voice from the back. 300, shouted another. Rosalie's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This couldn't be happening, not in America, not in 1875. Slavery had been abolished a decade ago, but here in the lawless frontier, women with no protection could still find themselves treated as property. $500, announced a cold voice that cut through the rabble like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing a tall man in an expensive black suit. Harold Blackwood, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory, and a man known for his cruelty to both animals and people. His steel-gray eyes assessed Rosalie as one might examine a horse before purchase, calculating her worth in terms of labor and other services she might provide. 500 going once, the auctioneer called, excitement evident in his voice at the high price. Rosalie's legs threatened to give way beneath her. She had heard whispers about Blackwood's previous acquisitions, young women who came to his ranch and were never seen in town again. Some said they ran away, others suggested more sinister fates. 500 going twice. The saloon doors suddenly burst open, and a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh midday sun stepped inside. Dust swirled around his boots as he moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. The newcomer wore a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, and a revolver hung low on his hip. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but Rosalie could see his jaw was set in determination. 700, he said, his voice quiet but carrying enough authority that every man in the room heard it. Blackwood turned slowly, his face darkening with anger. 750. 800, the stranger countered without hesitation. The auctioneer looked between the two men, sensing the mounting tension. 800 going once. 900, Blackwood snapped, his knuckles whitening around the silver head of his walking stick. The stranger pushed his hat back slightly, revealing piercing blue eyes that locked with Rosalie's for a brief, electric moment. $1,000, he stated firmly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $1,000 was a small fortune in these parts, enough to buy a decent parcel of land with a cabin. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "You don't have that kind of money, drifter." The stranger reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily as he tossed it onto a nearby table. "Count it," he said. The auctioneer scrambled forward, emptying the pouch and quickly counting the gold coins. His eyes widened as he finished. "It's all here," he confirmed. $1,000 exactly. Going once, the auctioneer called, looking nervously at Blackwood, who stood rigid with fury. Going twice, sold to the gentleman in the back. Relief flooded through Rosalie, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. Who was this man? What did he want with her? Perhaps she had merely traded one terrible fate for another. The stranger approached the platform, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Up close, Rosalie could see his face more clearly, weather-beaten from years under the sun, with a small scar above his right eyebrow, but his eyes were kind despite their intensity. "What's your name?" he asked quietly as he untied her wrists. "Rosalie Montgomery," she answered, rubbing her chafed skin. "And you are Keegan Dawson, he replied, removing his coat and draping it over her shoulders. And we need to leave, now. Blackwood stepped forward, blocking their path. This isn't over, Dawson. Nobody takes what's mine. Keegan's hand hovered near his holster. She was never yours, Blackwood, and if you're smart, you'll step aside. The tension in the room was palpable as the two men faced each other. Rosalie held her breath, certain that violence would erupt at any moment. Then, unexpectedly, Blackwood smiled, a cold, threatening gesture that didn't reach his eyes. Enjoy your purchase, Dawson. For now. With that, he turned and stalked out of the auction hall, his boots leaving angry echoes in his wake. Keegan guided Rosalie through the crowd, his hand protectively at the small of her back. Outside, the harsh Colorado sun momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, she saw a magnificent chestnut stallion tethered to the hitching post. Can you ride? Keegan asked, already checking the saddle straps. Yes, Rosalie nodded. Her father had taught her to ride when she was young, believing it an essential skill for anyone living in the territories. Good. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her in one fluid motion. Hold on tight. They rode out of Redemption Creek at a gallop, dust billowing behind them. Rosalie clung to the saddle horn, acutely aware of the strength of the man behind her and the powerful animal beneath them. She had no idea where they were going or what awaited her, but one thing was certain: anything was better than the fate that had nearly befallen her. As the town shrank in the distance, Rosalie allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time all day. The rolling plains stretched before them, golden in the afternoon light, and for a brief moment she felt something unexpected. Hope. They rode for hours, following trails that seemed known only to Keegan. The terrain gradually changed from open prairie to more rugged country, with pine-covered hills rising in the distance. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Keegan finally slowed their pace. There's a creek up ahead, he said, his voice close to her ear. We'll stop there for the night. Rosalie nodded, too exhausted to speak. The emotional trauma of the auction combined with the physical strain of hard riding had drained her completely. When they reached the creek, a clear, bubbling stream cutting through a small meadow flanked by cottonwood trees, she practically fell from the saddle. Keegan caught her before she hit the ground. Easy now, he said, steadying her. You're safe here. Why did you do it? Rosalie asked, finding her voice at last. Why spend so much money on a stranger? Keegan busied himself unsaddling the horse. No person should be sold like cattle, he said simply. Especially not to Harold Blackwood. You know him, I know of him. Keegan's jaw tightened. His reputation travels faster than he does. He set about making camp with the efficiency of a man accustomed to life on the trail. Within minutes, he had a small fire going and was brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. Are you hungry? He asked, pulling some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Rosalie suddenly realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. Yes, thank you. They ate in silence as darkness settled around them, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle gurgling of the creek. Stars appeared overhead, brilliant pinpoints of light in the vast western sky. Where are we going? Rosalie finally asked. Keegan looked up from the fire. I have a small ranch about a day's ride from here. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next. We. The word hung in the air between them. I won't abandon you, Miss Montgomery, he said solemnly, but I won't make decisions for you either. Once we're safely at my place, you can decide your own path forward. Rosalie studied him in the firelight. There was something in his manner that inspired trust, a quiet strength and decency that seemed rare in this harsh land. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Keegan nodded, then stood. You should get some rest. I'll take first watch. He handed her a bedroll, and Rosalie gratefully arranged it near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed the day's events. She watched as Keegan sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Mr. Dawson, she said hesitantly, may I ask you something? He turned toward her. Of course. How did you happen to be at that auction today? It seems providential. A shadow crossed his face. I was in town picking up supplies, heard about the auction from the shopkeeper. He paused. I've seen what happens to women sold that way. Couldn't stand by and let it happen again. There was history there. Rosalie realized personal history that had shaped this man in significant ways. But she didn't press. They were still strangers, after all, connected by circumstance rather than choice. Get some sleep, Keegan said gently. Tomorrow will be another long day. This time, Rosalie managed to close her eyes, lulled by the rhythmic sounds of the night and the reassuring presence of her unexpected protector. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Morning came with the song of meadowlarks and the soft golden light of dawn. Rosalie woke to find Keegan already up, tending to the horse and preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and the last of their provisions. You slept well, he observed, handing her a steaming cup. Rosalie accepted it gratefully. Better than I expected to. As they ate, Keegan outlined their day. We'll reach my place by nightfall if we keep a good pace. The terrain gets rougher from here, but Thunder knows the way. He nodded toward the chestnut stallion grazing nearby. Thunder. Rosalie smiled at the name. A hint of a smile touched Keegan's lips. Named himself, really. Found him as a colt during a thunderstorm 3 years back. Nearly got struck by lightning trying to calm him down. It was the most personal information he had shared, and Rosalie found herself wanting to know more about this taciturn rescuer. How long have you had your ranch? Going on 5 years now, he replied, packing away their meager cooking supplies. It's not much, just a cabin and a small herd of cattle, but it's mine. And you're there alone? The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Keegan paused briefly. Just me and a ranch hand named Miguel who helps with the cattle. His wife, Elena, comes by twice a week to help with cooking and such. He looked at her directly. You'll have your privacy, Miss Montgomery, I give you my word. Rosalie felt herself blush. I didn't mean to imply, no offense taken, he said, already moving to saddle Thunder. It's a fair concern. They set off as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, riding at a steady pace through increasingly wooded terrain. Keegan was right about the difficulty the trail wound through rocky outcroppings and steep ravines that required careful navigation. Throughout it all, he remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Are you expecting trouble? Rosalie asked during a brief rest to water the horse. Keegan's expression was grim. Blackwood isn't known for accepting defeat gracefully. I'd be surprised if he hasn't sent men after us. The reminder of the danger they faced sent a chill through Rosalie despite the warmth of the day. I've brought nothing but trouble to you, she said quietly. You've brought nothing, Keegan corrected her. The trouble was already there. Blackwood and I have. History. Before she could ask about this history, Keegan stiffened, his hand moving to his revolver. Get down, he ordered, his voice suddenly hard. Rosalie slid from the saddle as Keegan dismounted in one fluid motion, leading Thunder and her behind a large boulder. In the distance, she could hear what had alerted him, the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders, Keegan murmured, peering carefully around the rock. Coming fast, Blackwood's men, Rosalie whispered, fear clutching at her heart. Likely. He checked his revolver, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a second gun, offering it to her. Do you know how to use this? Rosalie took the weapon, her hand trembling slightly. My father taught me, but I've never shot at a person. Let's hope you won't have to. Keegan's eyes met hers. Stay here. If anything happens to me, take Thunder and ride north. Follow the creek until you reach a split in the mountains. There's a settlement called Pike's Basin. Ask for Sheriff Morgan. He's a good man. Before she could respond, Keegan moved away from their hiding place, positioning himself behind a fallen tree with a clear view of the trail below. Rosalie watched, heart pounding, as he waited with the patience of a predator. The riders came into view, 3 rough-looking men with bandanas pulled up over their faces. They slowed as they approached the spot where the trail narrowed, clearly searching for signs of passage. They came this way for sure, one of them called. Tracks are fresh. Blackwood wants the girl alive, another reminded. But Dawson is fair game. Keegan raised his revolver, taking careful aim. Then, instead of firing, he called out, That's far enough, gentlemen. The riders reined in sharply, heads swiveling to locate the source of the voice. "You're trespassing on private hunting grounds," Keegan continued, still hidden from view. "I suggest you turn around and head back to your boss." The lead rider spat on the ground. "We ain't leaving without the girl, Dawson. Blackwood paid good money for her." "Not enough," Keegan replied coldly. "Last warning. Ride away now or you won't be riding at all." The three men exchanged glances, then the leader nodded slightly. In a blur of movement, they drew their weapons and fired toward Keegan's position. The explosion of gunfire shattered the peaceful mountain air. Rosalie ducked instinctively, clutching the revolver Keegan had given her. When she dared to look up, she saw one of the riders slumped over his saddle while the other two had scattered for cover. Keegan had moved positions and was now crouched behind a different tree, reloading his weapon with practiced speed. The remaining riders were firing wildly, their bullets splintering bark and ricocheting off rocks. A movement to her left caught Rosalie's attention. One of the men had circled around and was now approaching her hiding place from behind. Without thinking, she raised her gun, steadied her hand as her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The report was deafening. The man cried out, clutching his shoulder, and stumbled backward. Rosalie fired again, missing this time but forcing him to retreat. "Rosalie," Keegan called, concern evident in his voice. "I'm all right," she answered, surprised at the steadiness in her own voice. The brief exchange gave away her position. The wounded man shouted to his companion, "She's over there." More gunfire erupted, and Rosalie pressed herself against the boulder as bullets struck the rock, sending chips flying. Then she heard Keegan's revolver fire twice more, followed by a cry of pain and the sound of a body hitting the ground. Silence fell, broken only by the panicked neighing of the outlaw's horses. Rosalie held her breath, waiting. "Rosalie," Keegan's voice was closer now. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed, still gripping the revolver tightly. "Are they?" Keegan appeared beside her, a thin line of blood on his cheek where a bullet or rock fragment had grazed him. "Two dead, one ran off." He gently took the gun from her trembling hands. "You did well." The simple praise broke something inside her. Rosalie suddenly found herself shaking uncontrollably, delayed shock setting in. Keegan hesitated only a moment before pulling her into his arms, holding her steady as silent sobs racked her body. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "It's over. You're safe." They remained that way for several minutes until Rosalie's trembling subsided. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her display of weakness, Keegan was looking at her with a new respect in his eyes. "Most people freeze their first time in a gunfight," he said. "You didn't." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear," Keegan said, checking her for injuries despite her assurance she was unharmed. "It's about acting in spite of it." He helped her to her feet, then went to check on Thunder, who had remained remarkably calm during the firefight. The stallion nuzzled Keegan's shoulder as if to assure himself his master was unharmed. "We need to move," Keegan said, leading the horse back to Rosalie. "The one who got away will bring others." They mounted quickly and set off at a faster pace than before, leaving the bodies where they had fallen. Rosalie felt a pang of guilt at this, but understood the necessity. They were fighting for their lives now. As they rode, the landscape grew increasingly wild and beautiful. Towering pines gave way to aspen groves with their white trunks and fluttering leaves. Crystal-clear streams crisscrossed their path, and occasionally they glimpsed deer watching warily from sheltered glades. By late afternoon, they had climbed considerably in elevation, following trails that seemed invisible to Rosalie's untrained eye. Finally, they crested a ridge and Keegan reined in Thunder. "There it is," he said simply. Below them lay a small valley, sheltered on three sides by steep mountains. A sturdy log cabin stood near a clear running creek, with a barn and corral nearby. Several dozen cattle grazed peacefully in the lush meadow that formed the valley floor. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney, indicating someone was home. "It's beautiful," Rosalie breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. A hint of pride crossed Keegan's face. "It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's good land." They descended into the valley as the sun began to set, casting the entire scene in a golden glow. As they approached the cabin, a middle-aged Mexican man emerged, rifle in hand until he recognized Keegan. "Patron," he called, lowering his weapon. "We were worried. Elena saw riders heading up the South Trail earlier. Blackwood's men," Keegan confirmed, dismounting and helping Rosalie down. "We had trouble on the way, Miguel." Miguel's eyes widened as he took in Rosalie's presence, but he asked no questions. "Elena is inside preparing dinner. I will take care of Thunder." Keegan nodded gratefully, then guided Rosalie toward the cabin. "Miguel has been with me since I started the ranch," he explained. "He and Elena are like family." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from a distance, 3 rooms, with a spacious main area that served as both kitchen and living space. A woman in her 40s was working at a large iron stove, the delicious aroma of stew filling the air. She turned as they entered, her surprise at seeing Rosalie quickly masked by a warm smile. "Welcome to our home," she said in accented English. "You must be exhausted from your journey." "Elena, this is Miss Rosalie Montgomery," Keegan said. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Elena wiped her hands on her apron, studying Rosalie with kind but perceptive eyes. "The blue room is ready," she said to Keegan, "and I've heated water for washing." To Rosalie, she added, "Come, I will show you where you can freshen up." Grateful for the presence of another woman, Rosalie followed Elena to a small room off the main living area. A brass bed with a handmade quilt dominated the space, but it was the large copper tub filled with steaming water that brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. Elena patted her arm. "Take your time, I will bring you some clean clothes." With that, she left, closing the door behind her. Alone for the first time in what felt like days, Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. How had her life changed so dramatically in such a short time? 2 days ago, she had been a respectable young woman facing an uncertain but conventional future. Now she was a fugitive, hiding in a remote mountain ranch with a man she barely knew, having just participated in a deadly gunfight. And yet, beneath the fear and confusion, there was something else, a strange sense of liberation. Her father's death and the subsequent loss of their home had severed all ties to her previous life. For better or worse, she was free to forge a new path. With that thought providing some comfort, Rosalie undressed and slipped into the bath, letting the warm water soothe her aching muscles and wash away the dust and fear of the past 2 days. By the time she emerged, dressed in a simple cotton dress Elena had provided, the sun had set, and the cabin was illuminated by the warm glow of kerosene lamps. Keegan had also bathed and changed, his hair still damp and his face clean-shaven. He looked younger without the trail dust and stubble, though the intensity in his blue eyes remained unchanged. "Feel better?" he asked as she joined him at the solid oak table. "Immeasurably," Rosalie admitted, inhaling the aroma of the stew Elena was ladling into bowls. "This all feels like a dream." Miguel entered, having finished with the horses, and soon the 4 of them were seated around the table. Keegan briefly bowed his head in a silent prayer before they began eating. The stew was delicious venison with wild onions and potatoes, and Rosalie realized how hungry she was. The conversation during dinner was carefully light, focusing on ranch matters and avoiding any mention of the circumstances that had brought Rosalie there. She was grateful for this discretion, though she knew explanations would eventually be necessary. After dinner, Miguel and Elena retired to their small cabin nearby, leaving Rosalie alone with Keegan. He built up the fire in the stone hearth, then poured 2 small glasses of whiskey, offering one to Rosalie. "For medicinal purposes," he said with the ghost of a smile. "After the day we've had." Rosalie accepted the glass, taking a small sip and wincing slightly at the burn. "I've never been much of a drinker." "Neither have I," Keegan admitted, settling into a chair across from her. "Saw what it did to too many good men during the war." "You fought?" Rosalie asked, realizing how little she knew about him. Keegan nodded, his expression somber. "Union cavalry. Enlisted in '63 when I was 18, stayed until the end." "My father was too old to fight," Rosalie said, "but he supported the Union cause. He was from Massachusetts originally, and you, born in St. Louis. We moved to Colorado when I was 12. Father thought there would be opportunities in the new territory. A shadow crossed her face. He was a dreamer, always chasing the next big strike, never found it though. Keegan studied her over the rim of his glass. How did you end up at that auction? Rosalie took another sip of whiskey, finding it easier to swallow this time. Father died of pneumonia 2 weeks ago. Turned out he'd mortgaged everything we owned to invest in a mining venture that failed. The bank foreclosed immediately. Her voice hardened. Mr. Blackwood apparently arranged to have me included in the property auction. He'd been persistent in his attentions since my father fell ill. Anger flashed in Keegan's eyes. That's not legal. Not much is truly legal in Redemption Creek, Rosalie said bitterly. The town marshal is in Blackwood's pocket, like most everyone else. Keegan set his glass down, leaning forward. Blackwood won't give up easily. He's not used to losing. You mentioned you have history with him. A muscle tightened in Keegan's jaw. 3 years ago, he tried to force me off this land. When that didn't work, he poisoned my creek, killing half my cattle. His voice was controlled, but Rosalie could hear the anger beneath. Then he sent men to burn me out. I was ready for them. 2 died, the rest ran. And the authorities did nothing. The territorial governor sent a marshal to investigate. Blackwood claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that his men were just passing through and I'd shot without provocation. Keegan's laugh was without humor. The marshal didn't believe him, but he couldn't prove otherwise. Since then, we've had an uneasy truce. Until now. Rosalie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. I've made things worse by involving you. You didn't involve me, Keegan said firmly. I chose to step in. His expression softened slightly. I couldn't stand by and watch what he had planned for you. The compassion in his voice touched something deep inside Rosalie. This man had risked everything, his life, his ranch, the peace he'd established for a stranger. Such nobility seemed almost out of place in this harsh frontier world. What happens now? She asked quietly. Keegan leaned back, considering. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. It's remote enough that Blackwood's men won't find you easily, and if they do. His hand moved unconsciously to his revolver. I can't hide forever, Rosalie pointed out, and I won't put you and your people in danger indefinitely. We have options, Keegan assured her. There's a judge coming through Pikes Basin next month. With his authority, we might be able to file formal charges against Blackwood for what he tried to do to you. Rosalie was skeptical. One judge against the most powerful man in the territory. Judge Harmon has a reputation for incorruptibility, Keegan said. And Blackwood has made other enemies over the years, if enough people stand together. He trailed off, and Rosalie understood his hesitation. Standing against a man like Blackwood was dangerous, perhaps fatally so. How many would be brave enough to do it? For now, Keegan continued, you should rest. You're safe here tonight. The certainty in his voice was reassuring. Rosalie finished her whiskey and stood, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Good night, Mr. Dawson, she said softly, and thank you again. Keegan rose as well, a gesture of respect that seemed to come naturally to him. Good night, Miss Montgomery. As Rosalie settled into the comfortable bed, she listened to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle hooting of an owl, the creak of Keegan's boots as he made a final check of the property before retiring. Despite everything, she felt safer than she had in months. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Keegan's face as he'd stood up to Blackwood in the auction hall, determined, fearless, and somehow familiar, as if she'd been waiting for him all her life. The next few days settled into an unexpectedly peaceful rhythm. Rosalie woke each morning to the smell of coffee and Alina's cooking, ate breakfast with Keegan before he rode out to tend to ranch business, and spent her days helping Alina with household tasks. The older woman taught her to make tortillas from scratch and showed her which wild plants could be harvested for food or medicine. In the evenings, Keegan would return, sometimes with Miguel, sometimes alone, and they would share dinner and conversation. Rosalie learned that Keegan had purchased the ranch with money saved during his time in the cavalry, supplemented by winnings from a high-stakes poker game in Denver. He spoke little about his life before the war, and Rosalie sensed there were painful memories he preferred not to revisit. For her part, she shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her mother who had died when Rosalie was 14, and her father's endless schemes for making their fortune. Keegan listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed his genuine interest in her past. On the fourth day, Rosalie was hanging laundry in the yard when Keegan approached, leading Thunder and another horse, a pretty gray mare with intelligent eyes. "Feel like getting out for a while?" he asked. "Thought you might like to see more of the ranch." Rosalie eagerly accepted, grateful for the chance to explore beyond the immediate surroundings of the cabin. Elena provided them with a small bundle of food, and soon they were riding through the valley, Rosalie on the gray mare, whom Keegan called Pepper. "She's gentle but sure-footed," he explained as they set out. "Perfect for these mountain trails." The day was glorious clear blue skies with just a few puffy clouds drifting lazily overhead. As they rode, Keegan pointed out features of his land, the best grazing areas, the creek that provided water year-round, the stands of timber that offered shelter during winter storms. "How large is your property?" Rosalie asked as they paused on a ridge overlooking the valley. "About 500 acres, Keegan replied. "Not huge by some standards, but it's good land, self-sufficient in most ways." "It's beautiful," Rosalie said sincerely. "You've built something special here." A hint of pride crossed Keegan's face. "After the war I needed peace. This place gives me that." They continued riding, eventually stopping by a small lake fed by a waterfall cascading down from the mountainside. They dismounted, and Keegan spread a blanket on a grassy spot near the shore. The lunch Elena had packed was simple but delicious: cold chicken, cornbread, and peach preserves. As they ate, Rosalie found herself studying Keegan when he wasn't looking. Over the past few days, she had begun to notice details about him: the way the corners of his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the careful precision with which he did every task, the gentleness he showed to animals and children. Miguel and Elena's 6-year-old grandson had visited yesterday, and Keegan had spent an hour patiently teaching the boy to whittle a small wooden horse. "What will you do?" Keegan asked suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. "After all this is resolved, I mean." Rosalie considered the question. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Before my father died, I was teaching at the school in Redemption Creek. I enjoyed it, but," she shrugged, "that's not an option anymore." "You could teach elsewhere," Keegan suggested. "Pike's Basin is growing, they'll need a teacher soon." "Perhaps." Rosalie picked at a blade of grass. "What about you? Will you stay here forever?" "As long as I can," Keegan said, his gaze sweeping across the landscape. "This is home now." There was something in his voice, a contentment mixed with loneliness, that touched Rosalie deeply. She understood suddenly that for all the beauty of his ranch, something was missing in Keegan's life, or someone. "Have you never thought of marrying?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Rosalie immediately blushed. "I'm sorry, that's terribly forward of me." To her surprise, Keegan didn't seem offended. "I thought about it once," he said quietly. "During the war, there was a girl in Tennessee whose family sheltered our unit after a battle. Sarah was her name." His expression grew distant. "We wrote letters for a while, made plans. Then Chickamauga happened. I was wounded, spent 3 months in a field hospital. By the time I could write again, her family had moved, never found her." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said softly. Keegan shook off the memory. "It was a long time ago, and you, no suitors in Redemption Creek?" "None I cared for," Rosalie admitted. "Father was always hoping I'd marry well someone who could support his ventures. The men he approved of were generally much older and primarily interested in my father's non-existent connections or a docile wife to manage their household." She made a face. "I was considered rather too opinionated for most of them." That drew a genuine smile from Keegan. "I can't imagine why." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of understanding and mutual appreciation that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Rosalie looked away first, suddenly flustered. "We should head back," Keegan said, gathering their things. "Storm brewing up there." He nodded toward the mountains, where dark clouds were indeed gathering. They rode back at a leisurely pace, arriving at the ranch just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Miguel met them at the barn, taking charge of the horses while Keegan and Rosalie dashed to the cabin. They reached the porch just as the skies opened, rain pouring down in sheets. Laughing, they stomped the mud from their boots before entering. Elena had left a pot of stew simmering on the stove and a note explaining that she and Miguel would remain in their cabin due to the weather. "Looks like it's just us tonight," Keegan said, hanging his wet hat on a peg by the door. Rosalie felt a flutter of nervous excitement at his words, immediately followed by self-consciousness. What was wrong with her? This man had saved her life, given her shelter, treated her with nothing but respect. The last thing she should be doing was developing romantic feelings for him. And yet, as they moved around the cabin preparing dinner together, she couldn't help noticing how naturally they worked as a pair, Keegan stoking the fire and setting the table while she stirred the stew and sliced bread Elena had baked that morning. It felt domestic, comfortable, right. The storm intensified as they ate, rain lashing against the windows and thunder booming overhead. The cabin was snug, however, the sturdy log walls keeping out the worst of the elements. After dinner, they sat before the fire, Keegan with a small glass of whiskey, Rosalie with a cup of tea. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering books they had read, places they had seen, beliefs they held. Rosalie was struck by how closely their values aligned despite their different backgrounds. "I should check the barn," Keegan said as a particularly violent thunderclap shook the cabin. "Make sure everything's secure." "Be careful," Rosalie said, concern evident in her voice. Keegan pulled on his oilskin coat and stepped out into the storm. Through the window, Rosalie watched his tall figure battle against the wind as he made his way to the barn. She found herself holding her breath until he disappeared inside. While he was gone, she busied herself tidying the kitchen and adding wood to the fire. The storm showed no signs of abating, the wind howling around the cabin like a living thing. When Keegan finally returned, he was soaked despite the oilskin. "One of the barn doors was coming loose," he explained, shrugging off the wet coat. "Fixed it though, animals are fine." He stood dripping on the rug, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, hair plastered to his head. Without thinking, Rosalie fetched a towel and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt that same spark of connection. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than usual as he dried his face and hair. Rosalie took a step back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "You should change into something dry. I'll make fresh tea." Keegan nodded and disappeared into his room. When he returned, dressed in a clean flannel shirt, Rosalie had the tea ready. They resumed their places by the fire, but something had shifted between them, a new awareness that made the air seem charged with possibility. "Rosalie," Keegan began, setting down his cup. "There's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" "Miguel rode to Pike's Basin yesterday for supplies. There's talk that Blackwood has offered a reward for information on your whereabouts, $500. Rosalie felt cold despite the warmth of the fire. "That's a fortune around here." "Yes," Keegan agreed grimly. "It means we can't trust anyone outside this ranch, and it confirms what I already suspected: he won't give up." "What do we do?" Keegan leaned forward, his expression intense. "Judge Harmon arrives in Pike's Basin in 3 weeks. If we can get you to him safely, make a formal complaint." "Will that be enough?" Rosalie asked. "Blackwood has connections, influence." "Judge Harmon has a reputation for standing up to powerful men," Keegan assured her. "And I have friends who will back our story." He hesitated. "But getting to Pike's Basin won't be easy. Blackwood will have men watching the trails." "Then I should leave," Rosalie said decisively. "Go somewhere far away where he can't find me, Denver or even back east." "Running isn't the answer," Keegan argued. "He'd find you eventually. Men like Blackwood don't forget or forgive what they see as insults to their pride." "Then what do you suggest?" Keegan's jaw set in determination. "We stand and fight, legally if possible, by other means if necessary." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Rosalie, a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Then we'll fight," she agreed. "Together." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and in that moment, something profound and unspoken passed between them. They were no longer merely rescuer and rescued, host and guest. They were allies, partners, perhaps something more. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the cabin, a different kind of energy was building, one of resolve, purpose, and growing affection that neither could deny much longer. The following week brought a noticeable change in their relationship. While nothing explicit was said, Rosalie found herself growing increasingly aware of Keegan's presence, the sound of his voice, the way his hands moved as he worked, the rare but transformative effect of his smile. For his part, Keegan seemed to find more reasons to be near the cabin during the day, returning from his ranch work earlier than before. Elena noticed, of course. The older woman said nothing directly, but Rosalie caught her knowing looks and small smiles whenever she and Keegan were together. One evening, as they prepared dinner, Elena finally spoke her mind. "He is different with you here," she said, deftly rolling out tortilla dough. "More alive." Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're just friends, Elena. Friends, yes," Elena agreed with a gentle smile. "But perhaps something more, no. I have known Keegan for 5 years. Never have I seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Rosalie could respond, the door opened, and Keegan entered, bringing with him the scent of pine and open air. Their eyes met, and Rosalie felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Something smells good," he said, removing his hat. "Rosalie is learning to make chili Colorado," Elena informed him proudly. "She has a natural talent in the kitchen." "I'm not surprised," Keegan said, his gaze lingering on Rosalie. "She seems to have a natural talent for most things." The simple compliment warmed Rosalie more than it should have. She busied herself with stirring the pot of chili, hoping he wouldn't notice her blush. Dinner that night was particularly enjoyable, with Miguel sharing stories of his youth in Mexico that had them all laughing. Afterward, as had become their custom, Keegan and Rosalie sat by the fire while Miguel and Elena returned to their cabin. "I received a message today," Keegan said once they were alone, "from a friend in Pikes Basin. Judge Harmon's arrival has been delayed by a week." Rosalie frowned. "That's disappointing." "Yes, but it gives us more time to prepare." Keegan hesitated, then continued. "My friend also mentioned that Blackwood has increased the reward to $1,000. "1,000, Rosalie exclaimed. "That's as much as you paid at the auction." "He's desperate," Keegan said grimly, "which makes him more dangerous." Rosalie studied the fire, watching the flames dance. "I keep thinking about what happens after we see the judge. Even if he believes us, even if he takes action against Blackwood. What then? Where do I go from there?" The question hung in the air between them. Keegan shifted in his chair, and when Rosalie looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You could stay," he said quietly. "Here, if you wanted to." The simple offer contained worlds of meaning. Rosalie felt her heart accelerate. "As what?" she asked, needing to be sure of his intentions. Keegan set down his glass and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "As whatever you want to be, Rosalie. A teacher if Pikes Basin needs one. A rancher's wife if—" he swallowed hard. "If you could see yourself married to someone like me." Time seemed to stop. Rosalie looked into Keegan's blue eyes and saw everything she needed to see: sincerity, respect, and something deeper, warmer. "I hardly know you," she whispered, though her heart was already answering differently. "I know," Keegan acknowledged, "and there's no rush to decide, but I wanted you to know that you have a place here, regardless of what happens with Blackwood or the judge." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "These past days with you have been the happiest I've known since before the war." Rosalie found herself at a loss for words, overwhelmed by emotion. Instead of speaking, she leaned forward and gently placed her hand against his cheek. Keegan turned his head slightly, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her entire body. "Keegan," she murmured, his given name feeling right on her lips. He rose slightly, still kneeling beside her chair, and with exquisite gentleness kissed her. It was a questioning kiss, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Rosalie leaned into it, her hand moving to the back of his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster. Keegan rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I never expected this," he said softly. "When I walked into that auction hall, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never imagined I'd find." "What?" Rosalie prompted when he trailed off. Keegan opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Everything, he said simply. I think I found everything. The raw honesty in his voice moved her deeply. Rosalie had grown up with a father who dealt in grand promises and elaborate dreams that never materialized. Keegan's straightforward sincerity was refreshingly different. He said what he meant, and meant what he said. I feel the same way, she admitted. It's frightening how quickly you've become important to me. Keegan smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Frightening but good, very good, Rosalie confirmed, returning his smile. He rose and returned to his chair, but the space between them felt different now, charged with possibility and shared feeling. They talked late into the night, sharing more of themselves than ever before. Keegan spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his parents who had died of typhoid when he was 16, his older brother lost at Gettysburg. Rosalie told him about her dreams of opening a school of her own someday, her love of literature, her fear that she would end up alone like so many frontier women whose hopes gradually withered in the face of hardship. That won't happen to you, Keegan promised. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. When they finally said goodnight, Keegan escorted her to her door. This time, their goodnight kiss was less tentative, a confirmation of feelings already acknowledged. Rosalie fell asleep with the memory of his lips on hers, feeling more hope for the future than she had in years. The next morning brought a change in routine. Instead of riding out early as usual, Keegan asked if she would accompany him to a special place on the property. It's about an hour's ride, he explained as they saddled the horses after breakfast, but worth it, I think. The day was perfect for riding, cool but sunny, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. They rode side by side when the trail permitted, talking easily about everything and nothing. Occasionally, their hands would brush as they navigated a narrow passage, each touch sending a pleasant warmth through Rosalie. Eventually, they began climbing a steep, winding trail that Rosalie hadn't seen before. Just when she was starting to wonder how much further they had to go, the trail opened onto a small plateau near the top of the mountain. Oh, Rosalie gasped as the view came into full sight. From this vantage point, they could see not only Keegan's entire ranch, but miles beyond rolling hills, distant mountains, and the silver ribbon of a river winding through the valley far below. I come here sometimes when I need to think, Keegan said, dismounting and helping her down from Pepper. Or when I want to remember why all the hard work is worth it. They spread a blanket on a flat rock and sat side by side, taking in the magnificent panorama. Keegan pointed out landmarks, the glint of sunlight on buildings that was Pike's Basin, the dark smudge of forest where the territorial boundary lay, the faint trail that eventually led to Denver. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Rosalie said honestly. Keegan's gaze was on her profile rather than the view. Not quite, he said softly. Rosalie turned to find him watching her with such tenderness that her heart seemed to skip a beat. Without hesitation, she leaned toward him, and they were kissing again, more deeply this time, with growing confidence and desire. When they finally separated, both breathless, Keegan took her hands in his. I know it's too soon, he began, his voice husky with emotion. We've known each other less than 2 weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Rosalie waited, hardly daring to breathe. I love you, Rosalie, he said simply. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you looked at me in that auction hall, so brave despite everything. And every day since has only confirmed what my heart already knew. Tears welled in Rosalie's eyes, but they were tears of joy. I love you too, she whispered. I tried to tell myself it was too fast, that it was just gratitude or proximity, but she shook her head, smiling through her tears. It's more than that, so much more. Keegan's answering smile was radiant. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, a kiss that spoke of promises and shared tomorrows. In that moment on that mountaintop, the future seemed limitless with possibility. They spent the rest of the morning talking and planning, sharing dreams and hopes. Keegan spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps building a larger house eventually. Rosalie described her vision for a school that would serve the children of the surrounding area, not just Pike's Basin. We could build it right here on the ranch, Keegan suggested. There's a perfect spot near the creek, close enough for children from neighboring homesteads to reach easily. The casual way he included her in his future plans made Rosalie's heart swell. This was what she had always wanted, not just love, but partnership, a shared vision of what life could be. As midday approached, they reluctantly packed up their things and prepared for the ride back. Just as Keegan was helping Rosalie mount Pepper, a sound caught his attention, the distant crack of a rifle shot. His entire demeanor changed in an instant, the relaxed lover replaced by the vigilant soldier. "Get down," he ordered, pulling Rosalie from the saddle and guiding her behind a large boulder. "What is it?" she asked, fear clutching at her throat. "Could be hunters," Keegan said, though his expression suggested he didn't believe it. "But we need to be careful. Stay here while I check." He crept to the edge of the plateau, keeping low and using rocks for cover. After a long moment of observation, he returned, his face grim. 4 riders heading up the south trail, too well armed for hunters. "Blackwood's men," Rosalie whispered. Keegan nodded. "Most likely, they're still a ways off, but they're definitely coming this way." He considered their options. "We need to get back to the ranch and warn Miguel and Alina." "Will we make it in time?" "Not by the main trail, they'd see us for sure, but there's another way down, steeper, harder to follow." Keegan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I won't let anything happen to you, Rosalie, I promise." She believed him. Despite the danger, despite the fear tightening her chest, Rosalie trusted Keegan completely. "Let's go," she said with more confidence than she felt. They mounted quickly and set off down a barely visible track that wound around the backside of the mountain. It was indeed steep, forcing them to proceed slowly and carefully. Several times, Rosalie had to close her eyes and trust Pepper's sure-footedness as the mare navigated particularly treacherous sections. About halfway down, Keegan halted suddenly, raising his hand for silence. In the distance, they could hear voices, men calling to each other as they ascended the main trail. They were closer than Rosalie had expected. "They must have split up," Keegan muttered. "Some coming up the front way, others circling around." He made a quick decision. "We need to move faster. Stay close behind me." They increased their pace as much as the dangerous terrain would allow. Rosalie's heart pounded with each precarious step, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic would only make things worse. Finally, they reached more level ground, though they were still hidden within a dense stand of pines. Keegan dismounted, helping Rosalie down, and led the horses forward on foot, moving as quietly as possible. Through gaps in the trees, they could see the cabin below. Miguel was in the yard, apparently unaware of the approaching danger as he split firewood. There was no sign of Alina. "We need to warn them," Rosalie whispered. Keegan nodded grimly. "I'll try to get close enough to signal Miguel without being seen. You stay here with the horses." "No," Rosalie said firmly. "We stay together." For a moment, she thought he would argue, but then his expression softened. "All right, but stay low and move exactly as I do." They secured the horses to a tree and began making their way down the slope, using trees and undergrowth for cover. They had almost reached the edge of the forest when a shout rang out. "There they are!" Gunfire erupted from their right. Keegan grabbed Rosalie's arm, pulling her behind a fallen log as bullets thudded into the trees around them. "Run for the cabin," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "I'll cover you." "Not without you," Rosalie insisted, clutching his arm. In the yard below, Miguel had dropped his axe and rushed inside, presumably to get his rifle. More gunfire came from the direction of the riders, forcing Keegan and Rosalie to press themselves flat against the ground. "We're pinned down," Keegan muttered, returning fire toward the barely visible attackers. "Can't stay here, can't move forward." Just then, a window in the cabin opened and the barrel of Miguel's rifle appeared. He fired several shots toward the approaching riders, providing momentary distraction. "Now," Keegan said, grabbing Rosalie's hand. "Run." They sprinted from their cover, zigzagging across the open ground between the forest and the cabin. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet, but Miguel's covering fire kept the attackers from taking careful aim. They were halfway to the cabin when Rosalie heard Keegan grunt in pain. He stumbled but kept moving, pulling her along. Only when they reached the relative safety of the cabin's porch did she see the blood staining his left sleeve. "You're hit," she gasped as they burst through the door. "Just a graze," Keegan assured her, though his face was pale with pain. "Miguel, how many did you see?" "4 men," Miguel confirmed, reloading his rifle. "Coming from the south trail. Elena is in our cabin." "She needs to get here," Keegan said, checking his wound. The bullet had indeed only grazed his upper arm, but it was bleeding freely. "They'll search all the buildings." Miguel nodded grimly. "I will get her." "Wait," Keegan said, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a second rifle. "We'll provide cover. Go out the back way, stay low." As Miguel slipped out the rear door, Rosalie tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat and began bandaging Keegan's arm. "Hold still," she ordered when he tried to move to the window. "There's no time, there's time for this," she said firmly. "You won't be much use if you bleed out." Keegan relented, allowing her to bind the wound quickly but efficiently. As soon as she was done, he moved to a window, rifle ready. "There," he said, pointing. "Miguel's got Elena. They're making a run for it." Gunfire erupted again as the attackers spotted the couple. Keegan and Rosalie both fired from the cabin windows, forcing the men to take cover and allowing Miguel and Elena to reach the main cabin safely. "Gracias a Dios," Elena gasped as she entered, immediately moving to check Keegan's injury. "How bad?" "I'm fine," Keegan insisted, his attention on the men outside. "They've pulled back to the tree line, planning their next move." Miguel joined him at the window. "The barn blocks their approach from the east. They will have to come across open ground from the south or west." "Which gives us a clear shot," Keegan nodded. "But we're outnumbered and they know exactly where we are." "What do we do?" Rosalie asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. Keegan turned to face them all, his expression resolute. "Miguel, is the root cellar stocked?" "She, patron." "Food, water, ammunition. Good, if things go badly, you can hold out there for days." Keegan checked his revolver, then tucked it back into his holster. "I'm going to try to draw them away from the cabin." "No," Rosalie and Elena protested simultaneously. "It's our best chance," Keegan argued. "I can make it to the North Ridge. From there, I can pick them off one by one as they follow." "Or they'll shoot you before you get halfway there," Rosalie countered, her voice breaking. "Please, Keegan, there must be another way." A tense silence filled the cabin as they all considered their limited options. Then Miguel spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "The tunnel," he said simply. Keegan's eyes widened. "Of course, I'd forgotten." "Tunnel," Rosalie looked between them, confused. "When I first built this place, I was more paranoid," Keegan explained. "Dug a tunnel from the root cellar to a cave about a quarter-mile away. Meant it as an escape route if Indians attacked." Hope flared in Rosalie's chest. "So we can all get away." "Not all of us," Keegan said, shaking his head. "Someone needs to stay and keep firing, make them think we're all still here. That would be me." "And me," Miguel added firmly. "2 guns are better than 1. Elena began to protest, but Miguel silenced her with a look. "The women must go," he said. "To Pike's Basin, get help." "It's at least 15 miles, Keegan pointed out. "Too far to walk." "The old McCready place is only 5 miles north," Miguel countered. "James McCready will help. He has no love for Blackwood." Another burst of gunfire hit the cabin, sending splinters flying from the window frame. They all ducked instinctively. "We need to decide now," Keegan said urgently. "They're getting bolder." Rosalie looked at him, her heart torn between staying with the man she loved and recognizing the logic of his plan. "I can't leave you," she whispered. Keegan took her hands in his. "You must," he said gently. "It's our best chance, all of us. Get to McCready's, then to Pike's Basin. Find Sheriff Morgan. Tell him what's happened." Tears filled Rosalie's eyes, but she nodded, understanding the necessity. "Promise me you'll be careful," she pleaded. "I promise," Keegan said, then kissed her fiercely, as if it might be their last chance. When they parted, he pressed something into her hand, his mother's ring, which he wore on a leather cord around his neck. "Keep this safe for me," he said. "I'll want it back when this is over." The simple gesture, so full of meaning and promise, nearly broke Rosalie's composure. She closed her fingers around the ring and nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Elena knows the way through the tunnel," Miguel told her. "Follow her closely. It is dark." More gunfire peppered the cabin. Keegan and Miguel moved to different windows, returning fire to keep the attackers at bay. "Go now," Keegan ordered. "We'll give you as much time as we can." Elena was already lifting the trapdoor that led to the root cellar. Rosalie hesitated just a moment longer, burning the image of Keegan into her memory, his determined profile as he aimed his rifle, the strength in his shoulders, the love that had shone in his eyes when he kissed her goodbye. "I love you," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Keegan glanced back at her, his expression softening for just a moment. "I love you too, now go. Live." With that final command echoing in her ears, Rosalie descended into the root cellar. Elena followed, closing the trapdoor behind them. Above, they could hear the continued exchange of gunfire, muffled but still terrifying. The root cellar was cool and smelled of earth and preserved vegetables. Elena lit a small lantern, its glow revealing shelves of supplies and a narrow passage at the back, partially hidden behind barrels of apples. "This way," Elena whispered, leading Rosalie into the tunnel. It was cramped, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. The air was stale but breathable, the floor smooth from use. They moved as quickly as they could in the dim light of the lantern, the sounds of gunfire growing fainter behind them. "How far?" Rosalie asked after what seemed like an eternity of hunched walking. "Not much further," Elena assured her. "See, the air is fresher." Indeed, Rosalie could feel a slight breeze on her face. A few minutes later, they reached the end of the tunnel, a small cave whose entrance was concealed by thick bushes. Elena extinguished the lantern before carefully pushing aside the foliage. "Wait," she whispered, scanning the area. "All clear." They emerged into the fading light of late afternoon. The cave was situated in a small ravine, well hidden from casual observation. From here, they could no longer hear the gunfire at the ranch. "Which way?" Rosalie asked, trying to orient herself. Elena pointed north. "McCready's farm is that way, beyond those hills. If we walk quickly, we can reach it before full dark." Rosalie took one last look in the direction of the ranch, though it was hidden from view by the terrain. Her heart ached at the thought of Keegan facing those gunmen, perhaps dying while she fled to safety. But she understood the necessity of their plan. The best way to help him now was to reach Pike's Basin and bring back reinforcements. With renewed determination, she turned north. "Let's go," she said firmly. "We have a long walk ahead." The journey to McCready's farm was arduous, particularly for women in long skirts traversing rough country. They kept off the main trails, using natural features for cover whenever possible. Elena led the way, her knowledge of the area proving invaluable. As darkness fell, they were forced to slow their pace. The moon provided some light, but the risk of injury from an unseen hole or rock was too great to maintain their earlier speed. "How much further?" Rosalie asked during a brief rest. "Perhaps an hour," Elena estimated, massaging her tired feet. "Are you all right?" Rosalie nodded, though in truth she was exhausted. Her boots, suitable for light ranch work, were not meant for cross-country hiking. Blisters had formed and burst on her heels, but she ignored the pain. Every step took her closer to help for Keegan. They continued their journey in determined silence. Finally, they crested a rise and saw lights in the distance, the McCready farmhouse. "Thank God," Rosalie breathed. As they approached the farm, a dog began barking, alerting the household to their presence. They were still some distance from the main house when the front door opened, and a man emerged with a shotgun. "Who's there?" he called, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "James." "It is Elena Vasquez from Dawson's ranch," Elena called back. "We need help." The man lowered his shotgun slightly. "Elena, what in tarnation are you doing out here at this hour?" They hurried forward, and as they entered the circle of light from the house, Rosalie could see their host more clearly, a man in his 50s with a thick gray beard and weathered face. "Trouble at the ranch," Elena explained quickly. "Men came Blackwood's men. Miguel and Keegan are holding them off, but we need help." "Blackwood," McCready spat the name like a curse. "That devil's been trying to run me off my land for years." He turned toward the house. "Martha, we got company." A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of the two bedraggled women. "Lord have mercy. Come in, come in. You look half dead with exhaustion." Inside, the farmhouse was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Martha McCready, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, sat them at the kitchen table and served them hot tea while they explained the situation more fully. "So Blackwood's after you, miss," James McCready asked Rosalie, "because Keegan bought you at that auction." Rosalie nodded, too tired to feel embarrassment at the unusual circumstances. "Mr. Blackwood seems to think I'm his property. Keegan disagrees." McCready chuckled despite the gravity of the situation. "Sounds like Dawson never could stand a bully." He turned serious again. "But 4 armed men is bad odds, even for Keegan and Miguel." "We need to get to Pike's Basin," Rosalie said urgently. "Find Sheriff Morgan." "You're in no condition to travel tonight," Martha insisted. "Rest a few hours. James can hitch up the wagon at first light." Rosalie wanted to protest, but Alina placed a gentle hand on her arm. "She is right, Rosalie. We will be no help to the men if we collapse on the road." Reluctantly, Rosalie agreed. While Martha prepared beds for them, James went to the barn to ready his horses and wagon for an early departure. "We'll leave at dawn," he promised. "Be in Pike's Basin before noon." Despite her exhaustion, Rosalie found sleep elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Keegan facing down Blackwood's gunmen. Was he still alive? Had they been captured? The questions tormented her as she tossed and turned on Martha's spare bed. Finally, as the first hint of gray appeared in the eastern sky, she gave up on sleep altogether. She found James already in the kitchen, drinking coffee while Martha packed food for their journey, ready to ride. He asked, noting her determination despite her obvious fatigue. "More than ready," Rosalie confirmed. Alina joined them shortly, and after a quick breakfast, they all climbed into McCready's wagon. The journey to Pike's Basin would take several hours, even with good horses. Every minute felt like an eternity to Rosalie, who clutched Keegan's ring tightly in her hand throughout the trip. They arrived in Pike's Basin just before midday. The town was larger than Redemption Creek, with proper wooden sidewalks and a 2-story hotel. McCready drove directly to the sheriff's office, a solid building near the center of town. Sheriff Morgan was a tall, lean man with a serious demeanor and intelligent eyes. He listened carefully as Rosalie explained the situation, beginning with the auction in Redemption Creek and ending with the attack on Keegan's ranch. "Blackwood's been pushing boundaries for years," Morgan said when she finished, "but this is bolder than his usual tactics. Attacking a man on his own property, attempting to essentially kidnap a woman. These are serious crimes." "Will you help us?" Rosalie asked directly. Morgan nodded. "I'll deputize some men and ride out immediately. Mr. McCready, are you willing to guide us back to Dawson's ranch?" "Damn right I am," McCready confirmed. "Never did like Blackwood. Man tried to dam up the creek that waters my farm last spring." "I'm coming too," Rosalie stated firmly. Morgan started to object, but something in Rosalie's expression made him reconsider. "All right," he agreed. "But you stay back when we approach the ranch. No heroics." Within an hour, a posse of 8 men was assembled: Sheriff Morgan, James McCready, the town's deputy, and 5 volunteers, all mounted on good horses. Rosalie rode a mare borrowed from the livery stable, her anxiety growing with each passing mile. The journey back seemed interminable, though they made better time than the wagon had. As they approached the final ridge before Keegan's ranch, Morgan called a halt. "McCready, you and I will scout ahead," he decided. "The rest of you wait here with Miss Montgomery." Rosalie wanted to protest, but knew it was the sensible course of action. She watched anxiously as Morgan and McCready disappeared over the ridge, only to return 10 minutes later with grim expressions. "What is it?" she demanded. "What did you see?" "The ranch looks intact," Morgan reported. "No sign of fire or major damage." "But there's no movement, either no one in the yard, no smoke from the chimney." Fear clutched at Rosalie's heart. "What does that mean?" "Could mean anything," McCready said, though his tone was not reassuring. "Maybe they're holed up inside, maybe—" He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. They all understood the other possibilities. "We'll approach carefully," Morgan decided. 2 men circle around from the east, 2 from the west. The rest of us will come in from the front, but slowly. Keep your eyes open for ambush." The men nodded, checking their weapons. Rosalie's hands trembled as she adjusted her borrowed mare's reins. "Miss Montgomery, you stay behind us," Morgan reminded her. "If there's trouble, you ride back toward town." "Understood," Rosalie nodded, though she had no intention of fleeing if Keegan was in danger. They moved forward as planned, the tension mounting with each step closer to the ranch. As they crested the final rise, the entire property came into view. Just as Morgan had reported, there was no sign of life, no movement, no smoke, nothing to indicate human presence. The posse advanced cautiously, rifles at the ready. When they were about 50 yards from the cabin, Morgan raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Hello, the house," he called. "Sheriff Morgan from Pike's Basin. Anyone there?" Silence greeted his call. Rosalie's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then, just as Morgan was about to call again, the cabin door slowly opened. Miguel stepped out, rifle in hand. His face was streaked with dried blood from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. Behind him came Keegan, moving stiffly, his left arm now properly bandaged. "Keegan," Rosalie cried, unable to contain herself. She urged her mare forward, ignoring Morgan's shout to wait. Keegan's face lit up at the sight of her. He moved down the porch steps, his pace increasing despite his obvious pain. Rosalie practically fell from her saddle in her haste to reach him. They met in the middle of the yard, Rosalie throwing herself into his arms. Keegan held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "You made it," he murmured. "Thank God." "I was so afraid," Rosalie admitted, pulling back to examine him. Besides the arm wound, he had a nasty bruise on his jaw and moved as if his ribs pained him. "What happened?" Before Keegan could answer, Sheriff Morgan approached. "Dawson," he greeted, extending his hand. "Looks like you've had some trouble." "You could say that," Keegan agreed, shaking the sheriff's hand while keeping his other arm around Rosalie's waist. "Blackwood's men came calling. Wasn't a friendly visit. Where are they now?" Morgan asked, scanning the property. "2 are dead," Keegan said grimly. "The other 2 fled around midnight when they realized they couldn't take the cabin without burning it down, and I'd made it clear I'd shoot them before I'd let them set a fire." Morgan nodded. "Miss Montgomery gave us a full account. Sounds like Blackwood has finally gone too far." He looked around at the bullet-riddled cabin. "I'd like full statements from both of you. Then we're going to pay Mr. Blackwood a visit." While the sheriff organized his men, Rosalie helped Alina tend to Keegan and Miguel's injuries. Keegan's arm wound was painful but not serious. His ribs were bruised, possibly cracked, from diving for cover during the firefight. Miguel had suffered the head wound when a bullet splintered the window frame beside him. "I was so worried," Rosalie said as she carefully applied fresh bandages to Keegan's arm, "when we couldn't hear the gunfire anymore." "It got quiet for long stretches," Keegan explained. "They were trying to draw us out. When that didn't work, they tried rushing the cabin, but Miguel and I were ready." He squeezed her hand. "I never doubted you'd bring help. I just had to stay alive until you did." Once statements were taken and a meal hastily prepared by Alina for the hungry posse, Sheriff Morgan prepared to leave. "We're heading to Blackwood's ranch," he announced. "With any luck, we'll have him in custody by nightfall." "I'm coming with you," Keegan stated, already reaching for his hat. "No, you're not," Morgan said firmly. "You're injured, and besides, I need unbiased witnesses. This isn't about personal vendettas, Dawson. It's about the law." Keegan clearly wanted to argue, but Rosalie placed her hand on his arm. "He's right," she said softly. "Let the law handle Blackwood. Stay here, with me." The gentle plea in her voice seemed to reach him. Keegan's shoulders relaxed slightly and he nodded. "All right, but Morgan, if he resists." "I know how to do my job," Morgan assured him. "Been dealing with men like Blackwood for 20 years. After the posse departed, an unusual quiet settled over the ranch. Miguel and Alina retired to their cabin to rest, leaving Keegan and Rosalie alone. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. "I never got to give this back to you," Rosalie said, removing the leather cord with Keegan's mother's ring from around her neck. "I kept it safe, as promised." Keegan took it, but instead of putting it back on, he held it in his palm, studying it thoughtfully. "My father gave this to my mother when he asked her to marry him," he said quietly. "It's not fancy, just a simple silver band with a small stone, but she treasured it." Rosalie watched him, her heart beating faster as she sensed what might be coming. "I've been carrying it for years," Keegan continued, "waiting for the right person to give it to." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I think I've found her." "Keegan," Rosalie breathed, tears welling in her eyes. He took her hand, his expression solemn yet tender. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other 2 weeks, but when you find something this rare, this precious..." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I love you, Rosalie Montgomery. Will you marry me?" Joy flooded through Rosalie, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Keegan slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he possessed. In that moment, despite the uncertainty still surrounding Blackwood's fate, despite the damage to the ranch, despite everything, Rosalie felt perfectly, completely happy. It was nearly midnight when they heard horses approaching. Keegan, who had been dozing in his chair by the fire, was instantly alert, rifle in hand. Rosalie, who had been reading nearby, set aside her book, fear returning like a cold wave. "Stay inside," Keegan ordered, moving to the window. After a moment, his posture relaxed. "It's Morgan," he announced, setting down the rifle. Sheriff Morgan looked exhausted as he entered the cabin, accepting the coffee Alina quickly prepared. Miguel and Keegan waited impatiently for his news. "We got him," Morgan finally said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Harold Blackwood is in the Pikes Basin jail, along with 3 of his men who participated in the attack on your ranch." Relief swept through the room. Rosalie found herself leaning against Keegan, suddenly weak with the release of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. "He didn't come quietly, I assume," Keegan said. Morgan shook his head. "Tried to buy me off at first. When that didn't work, he ordered his men to resist. There was a brief firefight, but nobody was killed. Blackwood took a bullet in the shoulder, nothing serious, unfortunately." "What happens now?" Rosalie asked. "Judge Harmon arrives next week. Blackwood will stand trial for attempted kidnapping, assault, trespassing, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit murder." Morgan's expression was grimly satisfied. "Even with his connections, he won't wriggle out of this one. Too many witnesses, too much evidence." "And the auction?" Rosalie pressed. "What about the men in Redemption Creek who participated in that?" Morgan sighed. "That's trickier. Technically, they can claim they were just following the bank's orders, and the bank will claim they were just trying to recoup your father's debts. But," he added, seeing her disappointment, "Judge Harmon is known for his creative interpretations of the law when justice demands it. We'll make sure he hears the full story." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more than Rosalie had dared hope for when she'd stood trembling on that auction block 2 weeks ago. "Thank you, Sheriff," Keegan said sincerely, extending his hand. "For everything." Morgan shook it firmly. "Just doing my job, Dawson. Though I must say, it's particularly satisfying when the job involves taking down a man like Blackwood." He glanced between Keegan and Rosalie, noting their clasped hands and the ring on her finger. "I see congratulations are in order." Keegan smiled, drawing Rosalie closer to his side. "They are indeed. Sheriff, would you do us the honor of witnessing our marriage once Judge Harmon arrives? Assuming he's willing to perform the ceremony, of course." "It would be my pleasure," Morgan assured them. "Harmon's performed more weddings than I can count. He'll be happy to add yours to the list." The week that followed was one of healing and preparation. The bullet holes in the cabin were patched, broken windows replaced. Keegan's arm wound and bruised ribs began to mend. And throughout it all, Rosalie found herself falling more deeply in love with the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. They spent long evenings planning their future together, the school Rosalie would establish, the improvements to the ranch Keegan envisioned, the family they hoped to create. During the days, they worked side by side repairing the damage from the attack, their partnership growing stronger with each shared task. Alina, overjoyed at the upcoming wedding, insisted on sewing Rosalie a proper bridal dress from fine fabric James McCready brought from Pikes Basin. Martha McCready contributed a lace veil that had been her own mother's. The small community that had rallied to their aid now celebrated their joy. Judge William Harmon arrived in Pikes Basin as scheduled. His first order of business was Blackwood's trial, which proceeded swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible. Even Blackwood's expensive lawyer from Denver couldn't overcome the facts. The verdict came after just 2 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. The sentence was 20 years in the territorial prison, essentially a life sentence for a man of Blackwood's age. "The law has finally caught up with you, Mr. Blackwood," Judge Harmon declared as he delivered the sentence. "Your money and influence have allowed you to terrorize this region for too long. That ends today." As Blackwood was led away in chains, he locked eyes with Keegan and Rosalie, seated in the courtroom. For a moment, his hatred was palpable, a living force that made Rosalie shiver despite the warm day. Then he was gone, and with him the shadow that had hung over their lives since that fateful auction. The day after the trial concluded, Judge Harmon presided over a very different preceding the wedding of Keegan Dawson and Rosalie Montgomery. The ceremony took place on the ranch, in the meadow near the creek where they planned to build the school. Friends from Pikes Basin joined them, along with the McCreadys and other neighboring ranchers who had never dared openly oppose Blackwood before. Rosalie wore Alina's handmade dress of ivory silk with Martha's lace veil. Keegan, in a new black suit, waited for her beside an arch Miguel had constructed and Alina had decorated with wildflowers. Sheriff Morgan stood as Keegan's best man, a friendship forged in crisis now strengthened in celebration. As Rosalie walked toward her future husband on that perfect autumn day, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that auction block to this moment of pure joy, it seemed impossible that only a month had passed. Judge Harmon spoke the traditional words, but added his own commentary. "These two people have already faced trials that would break many marriages. They have shown courage, loyalty, and love under the most extreme circumstances. I have no doubt that the union we witness today will endure whatever challenges life may bring." When he pronounced them husband and wife, Keegan kissed Rosalie with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. The assembled guests cheered, their happiness genuine after the long shadow of Blackwood's influence had been lifted from the region. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food, music, and dancing. As twilight fell, Keegan led Rosalie away from the festivities to the special overlook where he had first told her he loved her. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close as they watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "More than I ever thought possible," Rosalie answered truthfully. She looked up at her husband, the words still new and wonderful in her mind. "When I think about where I was a month ago and where I am now, it seems like a dream." "Not a dream," Keegan assured her, his arms tightening around her, "just the beginning of our story." They stayed there a while longer, planning and dreaming in the growing darkness. Then, hand in hand, they walked back to the cabin, their home, their sanctuary, the foundation of the life they would build together. 5 years later, Rosalie stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Keegan taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Emma, played nearby under Alina's watchful eye. The school Rosalie had established now served 20 children from the surrounding area, housed in a purpose-built structure near the creek, just as they had planned. Pikes Basin had grown into a proper town, with a church, a bank, and even a small newspaper. Harold Blackwood was a fading memory, his ranch divided and sold to smaller farmers and ranchers who brought new energy to the region. As Rosalie watched her family, her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where a third child was just beginning to make its presence known. She hadn't told Keegan yet, saving the news for their anniversary next week. Life wasn't perfect. The frontier still presented challenges: harsh winters, occasional drought, the everyday difficulties of ranch life. But they faced each obstacle together, their partnership only growing stronger with time. Keegan looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, so rare when she'd first met him, now so freely given, still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. He said something to Miguel, who took over the riding lesson, then walked toward her. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked as he joined her on the porch. "Just how fortunate we are," Rosalie answered honestly. "How different things might have been." Keegan understood immediately. He always did. "I thank God every day for whatever brought me to that auction hall at exactly the right moment," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Best $1,000 I ever spent." Rosalie laughed, resting her head against his chest. "The only time in history a woman has been flattered to be called a good investment." "The best investment," Keegan corrected, kissing the top of her head. "Everything I have, everything I am, is better because of you." As the sun set behind the mountains, they both loved, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rosalie reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate fear of the auction block to this moment of perfect contentment, it had begun with one man's refusal to stand by while injustice was done, and had grown into a love that would sustain them both for all the days of their lives. "I love you," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them. "And I love you," Keegan replied, the simple phrase containing a world of meaning. "Forever." In the distance, their children laughed, their home stood strong, and their future stretched before them, bright with promise. Together, they had built something rare and precious from the most unlikely beginning, a love that had not only survived the wild and untamed West, but had flourished there, as enduring as the mountains themselves.